Sure. Well, it's you're absolutely right. I'm in Canada's Parliament in the House of Commons to represent the people of Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Yeah.
And it's not like the people of Etobicoke Lakeshore speak with one voice.
Yeah.
There's a wide variety of opinions around which direction the country should go in. But part of my job is to meet with people in Etobicoke Lakeshore, to hear them out, to receive their correspondence, their concerns, their calls, and then I have to use my own judgment to how I would represent them. And I'm also the member of a political party where we have a certain program. That's what we presented to people when I ran for election in 2011. And so I have to follow through on my commitments. When I say, as a political party, we said we were going to do A, B, and C, there's an expectation that we then do A, B, and C. So we've been, for the most part, we've really followed through on our commitments. We looked at our promises from 2011, and out of, it was 101 distinct promises that we had. I believe that was the number, and we looked at it. We'd actually carried through on 86 of those promises, and this was at the time of the last throne speech, which was about a year ago. So we're really following through on our promises. So I have to do that. That's part of my role, to make sure that if we promise we were going to do something, that we actually do it. At the same time, part of my job is to make sure we don't make promises we can't keep.
Yeah.
I know there is a habit of politicians to do that, to say one thing, and then as soon as they get into office, then they don't do it.
Yeah.
And I don't. That's not the kind of politics that I think we should have. If you're going to make a promise, follow through, and don't make a promise that you can't. Especially a promise that you know beforehand you can't carry out. Another job of mine is it's not just Etobicoke Lakeshore, but I live in a city and a region, the Greater Toronto Area, and I want to make sure that the needs of Toronto are sufficiently heard. There's one forum for that, is the House of Commons. There's another forum that you don't see so much, and it's something called a caucus, and that's within a party group. You meet in caucus, and it's not in front of the TV cameras or anything, but this is where we have some very vigorous debates about what we want to do with the country, especially for the government. And so I'm a voice for Toronto within our national caucus. We've got members of parliament from across the country, and I will speak up on behalf of certain industries that are very important for Toronto and for Etobicoke Lakeshore in particular, such as manufacturing, the film and television industry, food processing. There's all kinds, and then also make sure that Toronto's needs are being looked after when it comes to things like infrastructure and transit. So these are the different mechanisms that I make sure that I'm doing what I can to represent the people of Etobicoke Lakeshore. It's a good system of accountability, our system of a single member district. I know there's other countries in the world where they'll have either proportional representation or some kind of mix, where there'll be people who represent districts and people who come from party lists. And I think our system of a single member representing a single district is actually builds a lot of accountability. And if you look in the world's great democracies, whether it's the UK or France or the United States, Australia or Canada, we all have that same single member district kind of system. I think it's a good model. The evidence suggests that these countries with advanced economies, they all have that similar model, and it seems to be an appropriate one for us.
It's very complicated, right?
Well, listen, it's complicated in the sense that on any given day there's 100 different issues, and so you're always juggling a certain number of balls. As a member of parliament, I can't just think about one thing.
Yeah.
I'm not a single issue member. Just like society is complicated. Everybody's doing different jobs, has different priorities, different circumstances. So I have to just come up with what I think are those important issues based on my own life experience, my own judgment. I like to think I can distill some complicated facts and information and come up with certain decisions. But just like anybody running a business or anybody doing practically anything, you have to be able to do that. You have to take all that information and then figure out how you're going to act. It's at certain points you have to make decisions, you have to act, and That's part of the job of being in government. Well, there's a lot to, so when we're in session, I go to Ottawa. I'll typically go on a Monday morning. My commute's not nearly as cumbersome as some of my colleagues who live in Western Canada or Newfoundland or the North. And I'm generally there until Friday, just because of certain responsibilities I have. There's things that happen within the Commons chamber itself. We have question period, we have debates. And that's the thing that people see on television. There's another whole component to Parliament, which is the committee work, which is really important. That's where we look at legislation once it's passed in the House of Commons at a certain level after second reading, and go to committee where we bring in witnesses who have some expertise on the bill and can talk about the pros and cons of a certain piece of legislation. We'll also provide oversight for certain departments where there has to be some parliamentary cross-party oversight for the various government departments. And so we bring in the officials and ministers and give them some questions. There's a whole other part of the House of Commons that people don't see, which is caucus. And that's what I mentioned, we have these vigorous debates. So, and then finally there's a really important part of the activity of a parliamentarian, of a member of Parliament, is just meeting with different stakeholder groups. So a lot of them will go to Ottawa and meet with several members of Parliament, either one-on-one or in groups. And these could be industries, it could be a private business, it could be some group from civil society. And it's part of my responsibility to give them a chance to say what's on their mind. So it makes it's busy. You got to juggle. I can only be in one place at one time, but you make it all work. And sometimes there's just not enough time in a week to do all the things you want to do. You have to prioritize.
So I went on the Parliament website, and I saw that your recent discussions were like status of women, Ukraine, and protection of Canada from terrorism.
Yeah, I gave a speech about there's a new piece of legislation about updating some of our security laws, our security legislation, the security that governs the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service. So there's a lack of clarity. I gave a speech recently on the budget. I also gave a speech on a piece of legislation called the One-for-One bill, which has to do with reducing unnecessary regulation for small business owners. Okay. So these are the kinds of things you have to do. It's a chance for me to give my opinion about these different pieces of legislation.
Okay. So, because when I looked into the status of women, it was about like Iraq. The sexual slavery.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I made a statement yesterday about that. It's really a sad situation in Iraq, where in 2014 there's people that are being bought and sold, human beings being bought and sold. And so my point of view is that doing nothing is not an option for a big, responsible country like Canada. We need to get involved. And so we are involved both militarily as well as providing humanitarian assistance. And I think just providing humanitarian assistance isn't enough. It's not going to stop a situation where there's people are in a state of slavery. And we've had very reputable reports about this happening, where Yazidis, Kurds, Christians, other groups are being enslaved and bought and sold, and that's just completely unacceptable in 2014.
Yeah. So I guess it's more than just the community and the city that you can that your job allows. Should I say something like, because when you talk about status of women in Iraq, it's about international matter. It's about Canada and Iraq.
Yeah, well, and it is, and I think that's as a federal politician, that's one of the things that we have to always be aware of and to make decisions on, is what is Canada's role in the world? What are we going to do to get involved in certain situations where we weren't necessarily the cause of this situation, but because we have certain economic means, because we have capabilities, for example, we're involved right now with the situation with Ebola in West Africa. And Canadians have developed a vaccine for Ebola. We've got healthcare expertise. We're providing humanitarian assistance over there. And now we're going to be sending some members of the armed forces to West Africa to help with that situation. It's not a military situation, but because the armed forces have certain ability to respond to emergencies like this, they're there, so they're being deployed. We have our Canadian military deployed in parts of Eastern Europe right now in response to some of the aggressive maneuvers by Russia. We got the Navy deployed in the Caribbean, dealing with some anti-drug measures along with our allies. So Canada has a role to play around the world in a whole bunch of different areas, including the situation in the Middle East. There's essentially two ways. One is to when I get a request for media to oblige that request. If it's relevant, if I'm the right spokesperson, if it's something dealing with the Etobicoke Lakeshore, absolutely I'm the right person. The other way is I'll proactively, if I'm doing something, I will issue media releases ahead of time to let media know. If it's a local event here in Etobicoke, there's certain media outlets that I'll advise. It could be something in an announcement in Toronto. So for example, I did an announcement about, it was a program that we had to restore habitat on the Toronto Islands. And I was involved in the announcement. So I let media know, I'm going to be doing this announcement. And then media can choose to attend the announcement or carry the announcement, or they can choose to not cover it. But that's how you become available, and that's how you get the coverage. And then, of course, they've got another channel which doesn't rely on the media at all. It's every politician in today's day and age can actually be their own media outlet. I've got a website, I've got social media, I've got my own ways of getting messages out.
So when you contact the media, it's like, as you said, is it like local media or like big presses like CBC or?
Yeah, it depends on the context. If it's something that's really purely of local interest, like purely in Etobicoke, there's a limited number of local media outlets that I would contact. Sometimes it could be something to do with a certain cultural group. Like let's say it's something to do about Ukraine. So there are Ukrainian language media outlets that I would contact, right? And then if it's something that's of interest for Toronto, then there'll be broader Toronto media outlets. If it's something of national interest, then it would be. So it depends on the story. And then you kind of ahead of whatever is happening, a media release. After the fact, here's what happened. Here's a photograph. Kind of help the media do their job. If they want to get further information, it's here's the contact info, and we can do an interview after the fact. It's a bit of a dance, right? I'm I guess a source of news, and then what do I think will be of interest to those media outlets? Understanding they always have deadlines and only a certain number of column inches in a newspaper, only a certain number of minutes in a day for a TV channel. So it's there's no simple formula to get media coverage. And at the end of the day, it's not about the coverage. It's more, are you getting the job done? And that's the best you can hope for. Well, I am there. So in Toronto, we have the number is 23 members of Parliament, and so 9 of those members of Parliament are in the government caucus right now. And so where Toronto's voice does get heard is at that government caucus. It's certainly heard, in places like the House of Commons through speeches and question period and all that, because 23 is a large number. Yeah. The Greater Toronto area, it's more in the 40 to 50 range for the Toronto area. So it's a big population. It's a big part of Canada. So there's just the number of MPs reflects the population. So just by definition, Toronto's voice will be heard. What's refreshing in this Parliament compared to the previous one is that there are Toronto MPs in the government now. So it used to be that Toronto MPs were outside of the government. They're all in opposition. So in that very important forum called caucus, government caucus, Toronto's voice is being heard. Integrity are paramount for me. Like, I wouldn't do this if it involved doing anything that I'd have to sacrifice my integrity or my ethics. I wouldn't do it. You know, not all my decisions are, obviously when you do this job, you never make 100% of the people happy 100% of the time. That's just the reality, because we're not homogeneous as a society.
Yeah, no.
So I just do the best I can based on what are the priorities of the people I represent, and then I have to filter it with my own life experience and judgment, and I do the best we can.